All right, here's a video that people have asked me to talk about. Matt Easton already has. I'm going to link that down below. I haven't watched that because I don't want to be influenced before I look at this, and I haven't pre-watched it either. I just want to give you my genuine off-the-cuff response to it. So this is an interesting video because what we normally hear about is the Western perspective on Japanese swords. You know, it's people with background in historical European martial arts talking about the katana, trying to figure out how they would use it with what they're used to, their techniques. I've done the same. But here's the opposite. So a Kenjutsu background looking at the longsword and figuring out ways to use it. So of course I'm going to link the video to Let's Ask Seki Sensei, the channel that this video is on, and I'm not going to show you all of it because it's not my content. I want you to go there and watch it yourself, but just some parts of it to respond to. You might. All right. I think this is something that Fiore could get behind because he often shows the longsword, hand-and-a-half sword, being used in one hand. You might wonder, why would you ever want to not use both hands? Because the other hand gives you more control over the weapon. It allows you to move more nimbly, and it gives you more leverage, more power, etc. That's all true. But there are some situations where you might have to or want to use one hand, be it because the other hand is injured, or because you have to just draw quickly and respond to something, or because you want more reach. Anyway.
This is probably...
Okay, that's an interesting observation. You would want the guard the other way around. I mean, you can have that. Instead of holding the sword like this with the guard vertically, you can use the thumb grip to turn it around. So now you are holding it exactly like that, which comes in handy in a number of ways, particularly for cuts like this. The crooked cut, which is not done with a true edge, but with a false edge, seems pointless because you can just cut with the true edge, right? Why would you bother with that? Well, there are situations where that's useful. For example, if you want to sneak in over the guard, this comes in handy because this would be a kind of a weak position if you wanted to cut high like that, whereas this is stronger. Yes and no. They are very different in some ways, but both are a sword meant to be used in both hands. Both were used extensively in dueling, but also on the battlefield. And the way they handle, well, you can't make too many statements about that because there are so many different longswords that all have different weights and different balance and different grip lengths and different guards, etc., etc. And there's also some variation in Japanese swords. Of course, some are heavier, some are lighter, also different lengths, all of this. But I can see why you would say that they're different, especially since I'm assuming longswords are probably much less common in Japan than katanas are in the West. So you wouldn't be as familiar.
I hope this video will be interesting for anyone training with longswords to see what a katana master would think of doing with a longsword. However,
very interesting indeed. I definitely appreciate that this was made.
However, again, we have no experience with HEMA and longswords, so if you are making any mistakes or have any misunderstandings, please let us know in the comments.
I also appreciate the humble, respectful attitude here. That's something that some Knight fanboys could learn a thing or two from. Yes. If you're not used to it, yes. In fact, there is something that at the old HEMA school that I used to practice that was referred to as the beginner bruise. It's pretty common to beat up your own forearm with the guard if you're not used to it. So that's a very fair observation. Especially in ox guard, it's pretty common for beginners to hit themselves in the forearm because, well, as you see right here, it is in the way, kind of, until you learn how to position yourself that it's not. So this way, the guard is away from my arm.
音がすごいです。
ね。こう危ない。
Oh yeah, if you hold it that way, absolutely. Which you would with a katana, because not a problem, but it works. But with a longsword, you have to hold it a little bit differently. Yeah, so holding the sword over the head like this is asking for trouble. So instead, you hold it here, on the side of your head, on either side, here or there, or you simply hold it higher in the sense that you don't allow the tip to go too low. So if I hold it like this, it doesn't endanger my head.
If you try to swing it like a katana, the handguard hits your head and shoulders.
Again, it's pretty common with beginners to have that happen. In fact, I remember doing that once or twice too, early on.
So Seki Sensei has a question for any longsword trainees watching this video.
Alright.
僕らの感覚だとこうするでしょ。こうついててほしいんだよね。知りたいと
どういう風に使うのか。
逆にもう何もわからない。
Okay, could the guard be oriented the other way? Yes, but it becomes a lot more awkward to carry. This way, with the blade flat against the body, the guard is flat against the body too. So I have a number of ways to carry it. I can carry it here, or here, or here, and I can, if I need to, I can tuck it in pretty tight. Also, it stacks nicely. Seems like a trivial reason, but if you were to throw a bunch of swords onto a cart to get ready for battle, it's kind of useful if you can just stack them on top of one another as opposed to that sticking out in all directions. So this way it can lie flat. If it was the other way around, you would have to carry it in front of the body like that so that it's out of the way, which for a long sword like this is not really ideal because look how much is sticking out now. For carrying, this is more useful. That's also the reason why on a messer, this additional guard here is only on one side. Because this way, it still lies flat against my body. Of course, there are sword designs with fairly bulky hilts, like the side sword here. And yes, this can jam you in the side, depending on how it's worn. But because it's single-handed, the grip isn't as long, it doesn't stick out as far. So you can allow it to ride a little bit further in the front so that it doesn't stick out quite so much. And yeah, it's not as comfortable as a flat one. But of course, in this case, you get so much hand protection that you're like, who cares? I'd rather be less comfortable than have a crippled hand. I mean, you could if you made it smaller, but the point is to have a large guard that offers a lot of coverage. As it is, the guard covers some of the forearm and it protects against strikes that come in low. And of course, it protects the hand against a blade sliding down. The real answer to guard orientation is both, because sometimes you do need it in the other direction too. I've had some moments in sparring where that additional guard on a messer that sticks out on the side really saved my hand. So really the tsuba protects against more angles, it just isn't very large. I find the best of both worlds is a longsword guard with side rings. It's much more protective, but more awkward to wear. Here's another way in which this guard orientation comes in. So if I want to win the bind, I turn the edge against the flat. And this in and of itself gives me a structural advantage. So if I try to push, hold against it, if I try to push flat against flat, they both flex and there's not that much going on. But if I turn this, now I can push it much more easily because it's more rigid in this direction than that. So that's one way. I also want to get the strong of my blade, which is the lower third, on the upper third of the opponent's blade, which is the weak. So what happens when I do that? This. So now I'm safe. So now I can bind, go in for a thrust safely, and it's not going to endanger my hand.
これはいいね。
あ、下のところでストッパーが。
Ah, a connoisseur, I see. The sensei likes the pommel, and he doesn't even know.
Because the end of the hilt is slightly larger, you can throw thrust the sword forward and it stops in your hand. This is actually a technique you can do with the katana too. We'll make it.
Huh, I wasn't aware of that. Yeah, it's not something that you normally do. I'm not aware of any treatise that shows a sliding thrust like this. That's more a thing with polearms or spears, but that's done differently. Either way, he has a good point here, because what you can do is let go with one hand and then thrust forward to get extra reach. When intending a single-handed thrust, for some people it would be most intuitive to let go with the offhand and do it like this, which you can. But if you let go with the main hand and thrust with the offhand, you get that much more reach. And I've done this in sparring before. Now, I was still a little bit too far for a deep thrust, but then again, it was a kneecap, so it doesn't take all that much. So this can be useful. The downside is now there's a longer lever that the opponent can use against you. So if your opponent hits the blade up here while you hold it there, you're in trouble because you have no control over it. It's still true if you hold it this way. You know, any knock there will be much harder to resist than if you have both hands on it, but this is worse. But it's a trade-off, because the idea is you would just quickly do this and immediately pull it back again. And you can do the same thing with a cut. You know, you would just quickly snipe to the opponent's leg and try to, as quickly as possible, go back to a guard, have both hands on for more control. And the pommel helps keep it in your hand in that case.
When he tried half swording, we found a problem.
あー、これが
Yeah, I've had that happen. Yeah,
勝手にそれてくる勝手にそれてくる
yeah. There are a number of ways. You can use the flat, you can use either edge. You know, it has somewhat different effects. The drawback, of course, always of using the flat is that it's not as rigid. That's a difference between the katana and the longsword. A katana is very rigid generally, whereas a longsword has more flex. So it's not quite as stout in using the flat, but it's perfectly possible. There are even strikes with the flat in some of the manuscripts.
こうなっちゃうけどね
Oh yeah,
こうなっちゃうけどねだから引いて
interesting. I haven't seen that technique in HEMA, but it makes sense.
そうすると突きになるからこ
Yeah,
うお
you can definitely do that.
お
Yeah. That's the thing. These techniques are not that different.
In traditional Japanese Kenjutsu, effectively using the shinogi to block, parry, and attack is very important.
That's something that you would do more with a messer. Now, to reiterate, a Kriegsmesser is not a European katana. The blade profile is different, the way it's made, the guard is different, the grip is different. In terms of usage, there's going to be more similarity, yeah. And you can use the spine of a messer similar to the way it's described here. If you haven't yet, go check it out. Definitely fascinating to hear a different point of view. I generally like this sort of thing, comparing notes, as I like to call it, and just seeing how somebody with a different background approaches the same thing. I definitely see plenty of overlap between European and Japanese swordsmanship because, like I said before, there are only so many ways you can effectively use these swords in a way that's biomechanically sound, but they definitely came up with their own flavor, I guess you could say, techniques that are different. And anyway, enough babbling. Hope you found it interesting. Thanks for watching and take care.